In this week's parasha, Parashat Miketz, we have the ascension of Yosef very quickly from the dungeons, the jail cell in the pit of Mitzrayim, all the way up to become second in command, Mishnah LaMelech, to be in charge of the whole Egyptian empire. So what takes place? So we know the story. Yosef had been in the jail in last week's parasha. He had interpreted the dreams of Paro's two butlers, the wine butler and the baker properly. Baker gets killed. The wine butler comes to power. 2 years go by. Paro has dreams regarding a famine. Paro doesn't understand these dreams. He sees them as nightmares. Start of our parasha, they take Yosef out. Yosef interprets the dream satisfactorily to Paro, meaning all the other interpreters. Paro is like, no, you got it totally wrong. That's not what my dreams were about at all. But Yosef explains to them there's going to be a famine, but we have 7 years to prepare for it. Paro feels much better, and he says, Yosef, you are so smart, you are so wise. I'm going to place you in charge of Egypt's economy. And Yosef he creates a whole storage system for the wheat during the 7 years of plenty, gathering and storing and storing. Yosef, the language of Asaf, he's gathering in all the grains for the lechem, and then he's eventually going to manage the government's wheat banks once the populace and the rest of the world become hungry and they need bread. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go to the actual Pesukim in the Torah. And we're going to see from the commentators that Yosef actually makes a very interesting request of the Egyptians who come to him for food. Okay, says the Torah, "Vatichlena sheva shnei ha'ra'av lavo," and the 7 years of famine came in. Basically, we had the 7 years of plenty. It was great. People were rich in Mitzrayim. Egypt was awesome. The empire is on top. And then the 7 years of famine start. Kasher Amar Yosef, exactly as Yosef had foretold, and as he explained in the dreams, Vahi ra'av bechol ha'aratzot v'chol eretz Mitzrayim haya lachem, and the whole world had a famine. But in Egypt, there was bread. There was lechem. But pretty quickly, we're going to see, things took a turn for the worst, even within Egypt. And then the pasuk says, "Vatirav kol eretz Mitzrayim," the very next pasuk, and now the whole land of Egypt became hungry. The famine hits Egypt. Vayitzaka am el Paro, and they come, and the people are crying out, "Paro la lechem, we need bread." Vayomer Paro, the whole Mitzrayim, and Paro now is speaking to all of Egypt, tells all the Egyptians, "Lechu el Yosef." Go to Yosef, asher yomar lachem ta'asu. And whatever he tells you to do, you got to do. Okay, so Paro is clearly taking a step to the side, saying Yosef is in charge. But Hazal, the rabbis come along and they wonder. They say, wait, what's going on over here? Why did the people come to Paro in the first place? Yosef had already been in charge for the last 7 years. Paro had already made him second in command, in charge of the economy 7 years earlier during the years of plenty. So why all of a sudden are they coming and crying to Paro? They should already know to cry to Yosef. And now Paro says, no, I'm still not in charge with this. I appointed Yosef, go to Yosef. So that's like question number one. And then question number two, moreover, like, why are they already hungry? Egypt, you had time to prepare, just like Yosef and the government had time to prepare and to store the grain. Why weren't you storing grain? Like what's wrong with you? All of a sudden, so quickly, Egypt is coming and crying to you, to Paro, and then now to Yosef too. Why didn't you do what you were supposed to do? So Rashi comes along and Rashi explains, gives a little bit of background to what's going on. So that's Rashi. Vatirav kol eretz Mitzrayim. What does it mean that the whole land of Egypt became famished? There was a famine in the whole land. Says Rashi, because all of the grain in Egypt, all of the grain of these individual Egyptians, it rotted near Kav. It was no good, except chutz mishal Yosef. It was only Yosef's grain that was okay. It was the only one that made it. So either we're going to say that Yosef's genius was just so much better than everybody else. He created a much better storage system to be able to store the grain so they won't go bad. Or we can say that miraculously Hashem is with Yosef. We know Yosef is always matzliach, and Hashem is always with Yosef. So maybe just miraculous that Yosef's makes and everybody else's doesn't make it. But again, why are they coming to Paro and not to Yosef? So Rashi quotes an interesting chazal based on a midrash that indeed they actually did go to Yosef first, but Yosef made a request of them that totally shocked them, freaked them out. That now they have to come running to Paro, crying to Paro. So it says Rashi. So Paro tells them that anything that he tells you, asher yomar lachem ta'asu, whatever Yosef tells them, you gotta do. So now, what did Yosef tell them that freaked them out? So it says Rashi, lefi shaya Yosef omer lahem sheyimolu. Because Yosef told them that you got to get circumcised. Okay, this is wild stuff. Yosef is telling them you got to do a brit milah. So the question that we're going to talk about in this recording is, why in the world does Yosef want the Egyptians to do a brit milah? What is that all about? So says Rashi, let's continue our Rashi. Now they came to Paro. He says, Kachu omer lanu. He's telling us to do circumcise ourselves. He wants us to do brit milah. Like, we don't want to do a brit milah. Amar lahem. Paro responds to them, he goes, I understand. Why are you guys being irresponsible? How come you didn't store grain the way Yosef did? Didn't he tell you that in 7 years we're going to have a years of famine? Why don't you step it up and do what you're supposed to do and be responsible? Amrulo, they responded to him, Asafnu harbe v'rikiva. We gathered, but it all spoiled. Amar lahem, says Paro to them, Im ken. If that's true, that all of your grain was spoiled, and only Yosef's grain that's being stored by the government banks, that's the only grain that made it, whoa. You got to do whatever he says. Why? Hare gazara tuva v'rekiva. Because look, he's going to blame Yosef now. Yosef made a gzera that yours shouldn't make it. What if he makes a gzera that we should all die? Yosef's power. I mean, his kochot, I saw some of the commentators want to go into wizardry level and all that. The way they see this mythical figure of Yosef, even though Yosef always says, it all comes from God, it's never me. But they're probably looking, oh my God, what kind of powers? Whatever he says, God does. So guys, whatever he says, you got to go circumcise yourself. Now, if we go to the actual midrash in Breshit Rabbah by us, so over there it gives a little bit more details. That they say they came Uvao etzel Yosef. They came to him when the famine got very strong, and they said, "Taneh lanu lechem, give us bread." Amar lahem, Elohai einan zanat arelim. So here Yosef responds to them, "I'm sorry, but if this is really, like I said from the beginning, it's all God that's blessing me and showing me the right path. My God, Elohai, He doesn't give food to those that are uncircumcised. So He doesn't. Lechu umolu et atzmechem v'atenachem. If you go do that properly, then I can give it to you." And then the midrash goes on to say that they then come to Paro and they complain, and Paro again asks them like why didn't you what have you been doing for the last couple of years? Like how you weren't storing your food at least for the last 3-4 years? What have you been doing? So they actually say not only did everything that we store get spoiled, but even the stuff that we used yesterday that was sitting inside our sal, that was sitting inside of our basket, inside our bowls that we were preparing the next day's bread with, even that went spoiled. So then at that point, Paro sees it really as a sign and saying, you better do whatever he says, because he's the one making this gzera against you guys, and we don't want Chas v'Shalom to make an even bigger gzera that we could die. So whatever he tells you to do, go and do. Even if what he's telling you to do is chitumi b'sarechem, to cut off some of your flesh, some of your basar, you go and you do it, because this is the way that we're going to survive. Now, interestingly, if we open up the Me'am Lo'ez, so he has a slightly different version of the Midrash where they were coming to Paro and crying that we don't want to die. Please do something about this, Yosef. We don't want to die. So he gives a perush over there. He quotes, I think it's called the Birkat Avraham. I think he's quoting over there where he says that they were scared, like, oh my God, Yosef is telling us to circumcise ourselves. We've heard of this happen before. And they take us back to the story of Shimon and Levi and the story of Shechem, when the evil Shechem ben Hamor, when this evil Shechem, the son of Hamor, the city of Shechem, he rapes Dinah. So we had the whole trick of the brothers of Shimon and Levi telling the city of Shechem, circumcise yourselves so we can all join together and be one big happy family. And then after they circumcise themselves on the third day, when they're in the biggest pain possible, that's when the brothers come in and murder the entire city. So the Egyptians said, oh my God, this is a brother. I don't know how they know that Yosef is. I guess they know he's an Ivri. But they said, oh my God, this Yosef, he's an Ivri. He's part of these people over here. Oh my God. His brothers already did this. And we remember what happened last time. This is a plan. He's going to want to murder us. He's going to want to kill us. But that's where Paro now responds to them. Now we go back to our Midrash and our Rashi. He says, no. If that's what Yosef wants to do, he can do that anyways. If he can make your grain spoil, if he can do that, he can also kill you on the spot right now. So really, whatever he's telling you to do, it's for your own good, and go and circumcise yourself. Okay, but now here's the question I want to deal with. Okay, here's the big question: why in the world would Yosef want these non-Jewish Egyptians, these Mitzrayim, to circumcise themselves? Like, what's the logic? What's the point of the Brit Milah of the Mitzrayim? Okay, so let's go through Bezrat Hashem a couple of approaches. Says the Kli Yakar. We find in the Torah that the orla, the foreskin, is called a herpa. Herpa means a disgrace, something that's shameful, so an embarrassment. And if we go back again to that story of Dinah, when the brothers tell Shechem and his father Hamor, he said, we can't marry with your people because you people are uncircumcised. And that's a herpa for us. That's a shame. That's an embarrassment. Ki herpa hilanu l'tet achotenu le'ish asher lo orla. It's an embarrassment to give our sister to somebody who has a foreskin. Says the Kli Yakar, not only is uncircumcised considered to be a herpa, but also he quotes a pasuk in Yehezkel that a famine, a ra'av, is also called a cherpa. So therefore, the logic is very simple. Simple midah keneged midah. When you remove one herpa, when you remove the orla, you circumcise yourself, that's going to be able to remove the second herpa, which is the ra'av, and then it's going to be fine. You can have yourself bread, everything's going to be okay. So too, the Kli Yakar gives a proof from Noach, and it finds actually a couple of other mefarshim that go in this angle. And you see the Be'er Ma'im Hayim, that we have ourselves Noach, who was born circumcised, he had the Brit Milah, and he was Shomer the Brit Milah, meaning Noach himself didn't partake of the Znut. He lived in a time period, we spoke about it in the past, back in Parashat, in the Bereshit, the beginning of Noach, the Nephilim, those fallen angels who were raping the women and doing all types of znut, but that was not Noach. Noach always kept himself shomer the brit, and therefore the food on the teva, the food in the ark, never spoiled. It was able to make it and be able to replant it, and he can plant his orchard afterwards, and everything was good because he was able to be shomer the brit. Now, if we go back to the Kliyakar, he adds a little extra idea. He says that the foreskin can lead to health issues. So he says, so too, he wants to relate that to the spoiled food, the spoiled grains coming from the excess. That he says, and I guess like it's kind of similar to when you have like a bunch of bananas or fruit in general, that when you have too much of it and some of it starts to go bad, so then what happens is it speeds up the spoiling process of all the rest of the produce. So here as well, he's kind of saying that once you get rid of the excess of the orla, you're not going to have a problem with the excess of the food, and Hashem will make a miracle, or it's going to be properly min hashamayim. You're going to have the right way of storing it, and things aren't going to spoil. Okay, for a different approach to why he wanted a Brit Milah right now for all the Egyptians. So says Rav Yehonatan, Eibshitz Tiferet Yehonatan, on our pasuk, he gives a little bit more of a mystical approach. Says the Tiferet Yehonatan that we found out about this famine through Paro's dreams, where we have ourselves these 7 cows, and he says this whole concept of the dream like and the cows, he says it's all related to the mazal. It's all related to a horoscope, and that's even the whole concept of following the dreams. This is what Hashem is going to be doing. It's all an idea about mazal. But he says that the Jewish people, we're above the mazal. We're above the horoscope. And we've said in the past, the mazal can affect us, but we have the ability to elevate ourselves above the mazal. So he says Tiferet Yonatan, where does that koach come from? How do we have the ability to arise above the mazal? So he says, you want to know how we rise above the mazal? It's because we do a Brit Milah. Says Yosef to the Egyptians, you want to beat the mazal? You want to be able to beat the famine? You got to get circumcised. Actually, in another answer that he writes over there, he explains that it's Dafka Yosef that's going to be the one that has to feed the Egyptians, because if we go back to that mazal, what is the mazal? What is the animal that corresponds to Yosef? He's the shore. While the Egyptians are known as the hamor, we're going to get into the hamor in a second, but the Egyptians' animal, they're called basar hamorim. They're the donkey. He says donkey is not the one that's the primary one with the food. The donkeys carry. It's the shore with the plowing that really symbolizes the food. So he says you need the mazal of the shore. The shore is the ox. It's the male cow that's going to feed the female cow. So if you have yourself a dream of the 7 female cows in Paro's dreams, so Yosef is the shore. He's the ox. He's the bull that's going to feed the rest of the cows, and that's why he's the one that Dafka is going to be able to take them out and above this mazal to be able to actually survive. The Tiferet Yehonatan gives another reason. Actually, we find this reason also in the Kliyakar. It's like part 2 of his first answer. But says the Kliyakar, says Rav Eibshitz, as well as many others, they give another reason. Okay, why is the famine ending with a Brit Milah? What's the koach of the Brit Milah? Says the Gemara in Sotah. This is Sotah Daf Daled Amud Bet. Ela Amar Rava teaches Rava. Kol haba al isha zona. Anybody who sleeps with a prostitute, anybody who's involved in sexual immorality, lesof, in the end, mevakesh kikar lechem, is going to have to request bread. Is going to be hungry. So anybody who goes after sexual immorality, that leads to a famine. Now, Mitzrayim, in the words of Chazal, is known to be like the main area in the whole world of sexual immorality. We found this back in Abraham when he was on his way down to Egypt, and he's scared that they might come after his wife Sarah and says, say that you're my sister. And ultimately, Paro does come after Sarah, and she's taken captive into the house and then to Paro's custody. And if it wasn't for the miracle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu plaguing Paro, saving Sarah Imenu, as she kept saying no to the attempts of seduction by Paro, he says that's the Tumah of Mitzrayim. We also see it when it comes to Potiphar's wife trying to seduce Yosef, maybe even Potiphar himself trying to seduce Yosef. So too, Rabbi Khan is a beautiful Dvar Torah from our parasha, that when the brothers come to the land of Israel, they go and they start with the Ervat Haaretz. What is the Ervat Haaretz? So he takes it literally. It's the Erva of the land. It's the red light district. Egypt is a place that is known to be seeped in zenut, seeped in sexual immorality. Says Yosef to them, based on his Gemara, that someone who is involved in znut, the punishment for zenut is you're going to have to be famine. You're going to go hungry. You're going to have to be searching for your lechem. And these commentators explain, based on many of the Rishonim, that one of the ideas behind the Brit Milah, there's many reasons behind Brit Milah, but one of them brings down is that it's meant to limit the sexual desire. It's meant to hold back the extreme. So in Judaism, we don't cut away our sexual desires, but we know how to control them. That's the idea of the Brit Milah. He says, Egypt, you guys are too far in Zenut. You got to take a couple of steps back. Now the Kli Yakar says that it's Dafka Yosef who's the one that can do this, because Yosef already conquered his desire when it came to Eshet Potiphar, and we've already seen that his grains are not rotting. He has lechem, because if you know how to control, you know how to not get involved in sexual immorality, that's the ticket to have food. So that's what Yosef's trying to teach them right now when he's telling them, you guys got to all circumcise yourselves. Okay, so Yosef is now going to be the mashbir. He's going to be the one that's going to give them lechem. He's the one that can teach them how to control themselves, control their desires, to actually get bread. Now, actually, in the past, we spoke about that when it comes to desire, when it comes to ta'ava, there is a bit of a relationship when it comes to the ta'ava for food, for lechem, for bread, as well as the ta'ava for relations. And we said, there's the Chazal speak about the mezonot, zonot connection. And the truth is, when Yosef withstands his temptation for Eshet Potiphar, so it's actually hinted to, Potiphar is actually hinted to, with the euphemism with the word lechem, because it says that Potiphar, vayazov kol shelo b'yad Yosef, he gave everything to Yosef, velo yada ito me'uma, and there was nothing that he held back at all from Yosef, ki im halechem, except for the lechem asher hu ochel, except for the bread that he eats. What is the lechem that Potiphar eats? All the commentators say this is not talking about literal bread, it's talking about Eshet Potiphar. So someone who can control his sexual immorality, he does not give into that. That's the koach to actually get the real lechem. As long as you don't mess with the lechem, then you're going to get the lechem, and that could be a hint to underneath this story as well. Now, if we take it one step further, I was thinking, where else do we find this concept of bread and Brit Milah? So we have it by Avraham Avinu. After he does the first Brit Milah, he's sitting under that tree, teaching Torah, trying to inspire the people, trying to inspire those angels that come to him. And again, he's offering them lechem. So you have this lechem Brit Milah connection again in the Torah. For a different angle, and maybe what Yosef is trying to teach them with the Brit Milah. So actually, I was sitting there and speaking to one of my neighbors. His name's Yehuda Geber. He's a historian. He's actually he has a popular Jewish history podcast. So he actually gave me a very interesting thought. He said, if you look at ancient Middle Eastern societies, you look at the Egyptians, you look at them, go fast forward to the Greeks, and he says, even as early as the 20th century in some of the Asian societies, there's this concept of a eunuch, of a person who is castrated, who's emasculated. That it seems to be that in the inner circles of the kings of many of the earlier courts, really up until the early 20th century, even in some places, the loyal servants of the king would be castrated, so that way it would be able to decrease their desire to rebel and to take power. And we see that in Hazal, they make note of this as well in our Mitzrayim stories, because we have the Sirisei Paro, we have the ministers of Paro. And if you actually back it up to the Ramban, at the end of Parshat Vayeshev, when the two ministers, the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ofim, the baker and the wine butler, who are called the Sirisei Paro, when they are sent to jail. So the Ramban over there writes that what is this language? Because on the one hand, Sirisim, it's a language of a minister, like a sar, but it's also a language of someone who's been castrated. So how do these two things work together? So he writes, because that's what they used to do in the old days. The people that were closest to the king. So we mentioned historically they were worried about rebellions, but here the Ramban brings down that. He says, they were also they were also in the areas where they were working as the baker. There was a lot of women everywhere. So I guess Paro was worried that stuff could happen in the background. So basically, he castrates them. So these more loyal servants, they won't cause any problems. So says my friend Yehuda Geber. So he goes, wait a second. In Judaism, we also are trying to affect the male member, but not the way the Egyptians do it, not the way the rest of the world did. What do? They do total emasculation. You just cut off the whole member. You cut off the whole part. By us, when we want to be servants of Hashem, we don't get rid of it. Instead, what do? We do a Brit Milah. We're not trying to eliminate desires, but rather we're trying to control the desires. And that's kind of what Yosef's trying to teach them here as well. Your desire in Mitzrayim is out of control. I'm not telling you like what Paro says to do with the closest people to him, to chop it all off. No, rather, we have to know how to control. And when you know how to control, that's the ticket to success. And if you do the Brit Milah, it's going to take us out of these problems of the famine. The mazal is going to change. Things are going to be good. Now, the Tiferet Yonatan gives a total different answer, but that was a little bit of a fun one as well, that he says that also, why did Yosef come up with this Brit Milah? Now, this is a side idea. He says he was testing the people, because were they really poor or were they just hoarders? Meaning, did you really run out of food so quickly? And it's only been, the famine only just started. So to be able to test them, to make sure they weren't like just hoarders and they didn't have it in the bag, he says, do a Brit Milah. Because if they're really willing to do a Brit Milah, that will be the test to make sure that they really, really are poor and they really don't have anything to eat. Now, we had mentioned when the Ma'amlo Ez looked at this midrash, he said that the Egyptians were very scared. They were worried that Yosef was trying to trick them and do like a Shimon and Levi against them and kill them, just like Shimon and Levi did when they told the Shechemites to circumcise themselves. And after the mass circumcision, just murders them all on the third day. So Rabbi Eibshas, Tiferet Yonatan, actually has a different angle. He says, no. This wasn't negative intention, but rather Yosef is trying to make a tikkun for his brothers because, okay, let's take another group of people and have them circumcise themselves, hopefully for the right reasons. And if that would happen, and then instead of killing them, I'm going to feed them, I'm going to give them lechem, that could be a tikkun for all that took place. So that was the Tiferet Yonatan. Now let's switch gears. Let's look at Sefer Emet Yaakov. This is Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. His theory: why does Yosef want to circumcise the Egyptians? Now, he actually has a side question. He goes, "There's another teaching of Chazal that when Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, they didn't believe him at first. He has to show him his circumcision to prove that it's really him. He really is Jewish. So he asks a side question like, how could this be? If Yosef is circumcising all of Egypt, then shouldn't they have known that? How would they know? They would say, oh, maybe you're just an Egyptian because we heard that all the Egyptians have circumcised themselves. Okay. That's a side idea, but let's go to his main question. So asks Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, he goes, I understand. You can't forcibly convert somebody. This is not, we see from the Midrashim, the Egyptians didn't want to convert themselves. So this wasn't a conversion for the sake of them becoming Jewish. So what was Yosef actually thinking? Or what was he trying to do? Argues Rav Kamenetsky, says the Emet Yaakov, the Brit Milah was meant to humble the Egyptians. And he brings a bunch of teachings that Egypt was known to be a very haughty country. He says that there's one teaching that the angel of Egypt was known as Rahav. Rahav was like the ministering angel, and Rahav means haughtiness. Now, side idea, I know we spoke in the past that the Egyptian's angel was named Uzzah. I saw a different version that calls him Duma, beyond the scope of this, but it seems to be from the commentators that their angels switched a bunch of times, and especially after the splitting of the sea, that some of them lost their jobs or got different kind of jobs. But here he says, he brings down one statement of Chazal, the angel of Egypt is known as Rahav, which he translates as haughtiness. Where do we see that the Egyptians are haughty people? So he says the Egyptians were not only haughty, they were actually pretty racist people, because we see that they wouldn't eat bread with people from other lands. They wouldn't sit on the same table with the Ivrim, with the Hebrews. When the Yosef's brothers comes, they're going to be sitting at different tables, and Chazal explain because the Egyptians wanted to stay separate from the Ivrim. They don't want to be anywhere near the Hebrews. Even when Yosef comes for the first time, they keep calling him, oh, that's the Ivri, here comes the Ivri, they buy the Ivri. So we see that they're very much into their ethnicity. We are the Egyptians, those are the Ivrim. He actually makes a very interesting comparison to the Plishtim, the Philistines. He says the Philistines also referred to Bnei Israel derogatorily as the Ivrim. They're always afraid, Ivri also means the other side of the river. They come from over there. Avram's from the different way. He's the outsider. He's the stranger. So you see this concept that he says you find it by the Egyptians, you find it by the Plishtim, and he actually writes, he makes a connection. We made the Gaza-Egypt connection in a previous recording a couple of weeks ago, but he makes a different Plishtim Mitzrayim connection, much more genealogical. If you go back to Bereshit, Perek Yud Pasuk Yud Gimel, it speaks about Egypt. Mitzrayim Yaladet Ludim. It talks about the different kids: Ludim, Anamim, Lehavim, Naftuchim, Vetapatrusim, Vetkasluchim. You have the different names of the children of Mitzrayim, of the original Mitzrayim, and of Ham's kids, and then eventually Asher Yatsu Misham Plishtim Vetakaftorim, and eventually from Mitzrayim's kids come forth the Plishtim. So he says the Plishtim, which are basically grandkids of Mitzrayim, continue with this haughtiness. As we see, they always want to be different. They always want to point at the Jew as the Ivri, as the Yosef, and everybody else as being different, and that comes from a really deep level of haughtiness. Now, ask Rav Kamenetsky, but what was the source of their strength? How did they see themselves as being so haughty? So he quotes a couple of pesukim from Yehezkel, that he says that in Yehezkel, the pasuk says that the Mitzrim were known to be big when it comes to basar, when it comes to meat. As the pasuk says over there, this is Perek Tetzayin pasuk Kavav. The pasuk there is speaking about how Hashem is not happy with the znut, with the sexual immorality of the Bnei Mitzrayim, and it adds over there, they're called Gidilei Vasar. They're the ones with the big basar, which Rav Kamenetsky, the commentators over there say it's really a euphemism for their male member, for their male part, that apparently they were very large in that area, and therefore that gave them a major haughtiness when they would go places. And if you fast forward a little bit more to Perek Kaf Gimel in Yehezkel pasuk Kaf, there again it speaks about the znut of Mitzrayim, and it refers to them over there as the basar chamorim, that they have like the basar, the meat of the hamorim, of the donkeys, which again he says is euphemism for their parts, but it's also supposed to it's an area where they show their haughtiness. So he says that we even find it open in the Torah, when the Torah in the actual Chumash speaks about the arayot, before it gets into the sexual immoralities that Hashem hates so much, it says, oh, don't do like the Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim. Don't do like the actions of the Egyptians, which is all about the arayot. It's all about the sexual immorality. They are known as the kings of Zenut. So they think that's their kavod. They think that's where their honor comes from. So it comes on Yosef and tells them, no, you got to break this. You know why there's a famine right now? Hashem is attacking you because of your Znut, and it's time to circumcise yourselves. You got to break your haughtiness. You got to humble yourself. Rav Kamenetsky also adds that Yosef was also forward thinking. He was thinking to himself, oh, I need to make it easier for my brothers when they come down, because part of Yosef, even when later on, when he speaks to the brothers later on, he says, no, it was all part of Hashem's plan that I would come down first and set it all up. I'll come down in slavery so that you guys can come down like kings, because I really want to set it up. Now, what does he mean by setting it up? He wants to set up to make it in a place that's easier, so that if everybody is circumcised over there, you guys won't be such ivrim. You guys won't be such strangers. It might be a little bit easier. You won't have to deal with like the peer pressure of Mitzrayim, because actually there is chazals that say afterwards that once Yosef died, the Egyptians went back to not circumcising themselves. And there's even ideas that the Jews stopped circumcising themselves, or that they were moshech b'or latam. They tried to hide their circumcisions until eventually, when the first thing we're doing when we leave Egypt, we're going to have the double bloods of leaving Egypt. The one is the dam of Pesach, the korban Pesach, but we're also going to have the dam of the milah. We're going to do a massive brit milah as we leave Egypt as well. Now, so too, we find in the Chavetz Chaim, he also plays on this theme that Yosef is trying to remove as much tumah as possible before his family, before the brothers, before Yaakov Avinu comes down. So getting them to circumcise themselves is bringing the whole country to one more level of kedusha for the family. Now, the Alshich learns this whole idea a little bit more spiritual. The Alshich writes that, the Sirah Derech quotes him, that Yosef is trying to defeat the spiritual energy of Egypt, that the Sar of Egypt is symbolized by the Znud, the Ervata Aretz. And how do we do that? We have to do a Brit Milah to attack their angel in the Shamayim. By doing an action down below, we're actually going to weaken the angel of Mitzrayim, which symbolizes the Znut, actually the Shach, the Siftei Kohen on the Torah. So he writes that by circumcising these Egyptians down below, we're actually weakening their koach so that they won't be able to dominate against the Jewish women. We're going to know that when we leave Egypt, it's because of the righteous women that stayed separate from the Egyptian men, even though there were certain things that we did, like we mentioned, the guys might have tried to hide their circumcisions, stop circumcise. The Jews might have taken a couple of steps towards assimilation, but there were a couple of things that we did that we wouldn't do. And we kept our names, we kept our clothing, but we also kept ourselves separate from the men. But how do we do that? Aren't the Egyptian men aggressive? We saw Paro took Sarah Imenu captive into his castle, into his palace. But we see that says the Alshich, says the Siftei Kohen, that it could be that by Yosef requiring the circumcision on the Egyptians, it weakened their desire and their temptations, that it gave us enough of a protection that we can withstand them. And the women did not intermix with the Egyptian men. They did not intermingle. They didn't sleep around. Now, in truth, we did mention a couple of years ago that there's another zechut that kept the women separate, and that's when Yehuda goes down, and Yehuda first upsets up the land of Goshen. He says he goes down Goshna. Why does he go Goshna? Why does he go to the land of Goshen? He wanted to set up a separate area for the Jewish people. Now, the Alshich also writes that Goshen is a special zechut of Sarah Imenu. As we mentioned in the past, that when Paro was Vayigash, when he tried to come on to Sarah Imenu, and she said no, and she was Sanua, and she stayed away from him. So because of the Vayigash of Paro, she was awarded the land of Goshen, because it said the Paro wanted to marry her, so he wrote a ketubah for her, and he offered her the land of Goshen. And it sounds like the zechut of Goshen, even though the marriage never happened, Baruch Hashem, and Sarah Imenu stayed with Avram Avinu, but he ultimately sends them away with a lot of wealth, which sounds like he sent them away with that right to the land of Goshen. So the land of Goshen symbolizes that sniut, the separation of the Jewish women and the Jewish men from the Egyptians as much as possible, and that's really the zechut of the sniut of Sarah Imenu against the tikkun brit, but now from the female side, that we're not going to allow for sexual immorality. And that's going to be the zechut that's going to protect us in the land of Mitzrayim. Okay, actually a little bit of a fun Hanukkah connection. I think we said this once in the past as well. That part of the whole Hanukkah story was the Hellenization of the Jews. It was this assimilation. They were intermingling too much with the Greeks, and part of the war of the Hashmonaim, part of the war of the Maccabees, of these Kohanim, was to purify the people, to bring us back to our Judaism, to stop the assimilation, and that also could be related to the Goshna, because Goshna is also the letters of Nes Gadol Hayasham, again hinting to this idea that it's through the separation that we're actually going to be able to reach our spiritual heights. Okay. Getting back to Rav Kamenetsky. So Rav Kamenetsky is saying that he was worried the Jews wouldn't be able to stand up to the peer pressure. And we see that's what takes place after Yosef dies. They start to begin to take their steps towards assimilation. But it's the Brit Milah that's going to wake us up. That Brit Milah that we're going to do at the very end of our time in Egypt, that's going to remove the Egyptian influences on us. And he says, Rav Kamenetsky, he learns that's what the herpa actually is. That's the disgrace. That's the embarrassment. And he also quotes, if we look to the future, to a different great-great-grandson of Yosef, you're going to be Yoshua from Ephraim. Mitzrayim. In Sefer Yeshua, Perek Tet, when we first enter the land of Israel. So what does Yeshua do? Yeshua circumcises all the people as they enter the land of Israel. And once that's done, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Vayomer Adonai el Yoshua, Hayom galoti et cherpat Mitzrayim alechem." Today, you know what you just did? You just removed the herpa. That herpa that we spoke about, that disgrace, the disgrace of Egypt is gone. So now some learn what's the herpa. That's that the slavery is finally over. We finally came to the land of Israel, and now we're going to be free people. We're going to conquer the land. We're going to be our own rulers. We're going to have our land of Israel. But if Kamenetsky says, no, that's not the herpa, go with the flow of the Pesukim. The herpa of the Egyptians is that they weren't circumcised, that they were all about the znut. That's the Cherpa of Mitzrayim, and that's what Yosef's trying to fix right now. He's trying to fix the Cherpa of Mitzrayim by crushing their haughtiness, by cutting their basar, literally doing a circumcision to bring down their haughtiness so we can be at a level of more beauty and more purity. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu can say, oh, there's no Cherpa in this land, and that'll be their blessing to get bread. Okay, let's try to get a different angle on our question. But at the end of the day, why does Yosef want to circumcise non-Jews? So I actually saw one approach that says he wasn't circumcising the Egyptians for them. He actually was trying to get a statement out to his father that he's still alive. Remember, according to Chazal, there was a cherem, there was an oath that was taken once the brother sold him into slavery that he wouldn't tell anybody what happened. So he thought maybe, according to this approach, he thought if I circumcise all the Egyptians, word's going to get out. There's a new ruler in Egypt that's circumcising everybody. And then when Yaakov would hear that, he might say, oh, that's probably Yosef. Who else would do something like that? So that could be a different angle of why he was trying to do that. Or we could say maybe a bigger idea. Why does Yosef want to convert them? Because really, he wants to convert them. He wants to change the world. And maybe they didn't want to, but maybe he's thinking, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. They'll do it for the wrong reasons now, but eventually they're going to do it for the right reasons. Just like Avram Avinu goes out there into the world and he tries to change the world. Now, Yosef is not going to be the guy that's going to live in Goshen. Yosef is the guy that lives in the palace of Paro. He wants to change the world. He's out there in the real world, in the non-Jewish world. He's not sitting in the Jewish suburbs, in the Jewish communities, in the ghettos of the Jews. He wants to actually make a difference out there. So maybe he sees it as a much bigger picture. Now, a different approach to this question about why would Yosef want to circumcise the non-Jews? So says in Sefer Ma'ayan Beit HaShrav, this is Rabbi Schwab on the parasha, he writes as follows. He says, wait a second, in truth, it's not so simple that these Egyptians weren't chayav in a brit milah. They weren't obligated to do a brit milah, to do a circumcision, because he says there were some nations who had this obligation. He goes, according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides halakha, the Bnei Avraham had a bunch of kids. We always think about Yitzchak. We also know about Yishmael, and then we have his Bnei Keturah. They're all Bnei Avraham, and according to the Rambam, they are all chayav in a brit milah. So he says Yosef was actually speaking to them because he's looked around and he saw that Egypt was filled with Bnei Avraham. There are a bunch of Ishmaelites everywhere. There's a bunch of Bnei Keturah everywhere. And, Yosef is a tzaddik. He's the person of the Brit Milah, Tikkun Brit. So he wants to go out there and make sure that everyone's keeping their halacha. So therefore, he's speaking to all of the Egyptians, but he's really trying to focus on the Bnei Avraham because they really have this as an obligation. Now, the connection about what is Yishmael doing in Egypt, or what are the Bnei Keturah doing in Egypt? So he says you have to remember that at the end of Parashat Hayei Sarah, when it speaks about the end of Yishmael's life and he marries, has a bunch of kids, and then it says that he expands. So where does this expansion? Where does he settle? So it says Vishkenu me Chavila ad Shur, that they were dwelling from Chavila until Shur. Asher al Penei Mitzrayim boacha Ashura, which is close to Egypt, all the way up to Ashur on the other side. So they made it al Penei Mitzrayim. They got close to Mitzrayim. Al Penei Kol Echav Nafal, and they're going to be dwelling with all of their brothers. Who are the brothers of Yishmael? The brothers of Yishmael could be the Bnei Keturah. So that's how Rav Schwab wants to learn that pasuk, that we have ourselves Ishmael and the Bnei Keturah making it all the way to Mitzrayim. You have to understand Ishmael's connection to Mitzrayim is actually much deeper because first off, his mother, who was Hagar. Hagar was the daughter of Paro, according to Midrash, but she's called all throughout the Torah. Hagar is called the Mitzrit. It's Hagar, it's the Shivcha HaMitzrit. So she originally comes from Egypt. So once Ishmael is sent away, where is he going to go to? So it's most natural that he's going to go back to where his mother came from, go back to where you have some family. He goes back to Egypt. And actually at the very end of Vayera, it says that Ishmael actually went to Mitzrayim to take a wife. And according to the Midrashim, it's interesting Midrashim, this is actually Ishmael's second wife, Fatima. According to Targum Yonatan, according to Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, on the end of Vayera over there, they explain that the first wife didn't have chesed, Avram didn't like her, and eventually Ishmael divorces the first one and then remarries, and the second wife he takes is from Mitzrayim. And then we also saw from the earlier story of Yosef that who's the one leading the caravans to Egypt to do business with Egypt? It's the Ishmaelim. Ishmaelim, in a certain sense, were Bedouins. They traveled back and forth all the way from Ashur all the way down to Egypt, but they're constantly doing business with Egyptians. What happens when you do business somewhere? You settle there as well. So it seems like there were Egyptians, that there were Ishmaelim that were living amongst the Egyptians. So much so, says Rav Schwab, that when the Torah says that Yosef was bought by the minister of Paro, by Potiphar, it says that Potiphar was an Ish Mitzri. He's an Egyptian person. Why are you telling me that? Aren't all the ministers of Egypt Egyptian? No, he says it must be that Egypt was so filled. First, that they were an empire, there was major business, but there were other Bnei Avraham there, and Ishmael probably was so close to Mitzrayim to begin with. He had gone there to get married again, that they probably had risen in the ranks of the political ranks of Egypt. So the fact that Potiphar is an Ish Mitzri has to be said that because he could have been an Ish Ishmaeli as well. And therefore, says Rav Schwab, Yosef in our parasha is telling them, you gotta circumcise yourselves, because he's reminding them, you guys are from the Bnei Avraham. You guys have halakha to keep also. This is part of your halakha. Okay. But Lanut Dati, I think that the Mitzrayim-Ishmael connection is actually even deeper than that. We mentioned that the Galut of Mitzrayim starts with Yosef being sold to this Ishmaelite caravan. The Orchat Ishmaelim, this is the beginning of Galut Mitzrayim with Yosef. Says the Ramchal. This is the Ramchal in a Sefer Kinat Hashem Tzevaot. I start quoting a couple of places as well. You see, he writes as follows. Shani Sayon Shel Yosef Hayadafka b'Mitzrayim. That the test of Yosef is specifically in Mitzrayim. Why? Ki Mitzrayim who sawed Yishmael, says the Ramchal, because Mitzrayim is the secret, is the hidden connection of Yishmael. Sheshama michshol hazeh, because that's where the stumbling block of Yishmael, or the negative kochot that are going to test the Jewish people, that's found in Yishmael, and that's now being found in Mitzrayim, according to the Ramchal. So that's why Yosef has to be sent there, because we need the koch of Yosef to fight against it. Okay, so we're saying Yishmael both genealogically has a connection to Mitzrayim as he's marrying into her. We see that the spiritual yichus, the spiritual connection, as the Ramchal is saying over that the sword of Yishmael can be found in Mitzrayim. We spoke in the past that Yishmael is compared to a donkey. Yishmael is the Amad Domel Chamor, as we saw by the Akedah. We mentioned now that Mitzrayim is the Basar Chamorim. I actually saw in a sefer called Ketz Hayamin. I couldn't find the original source he was quoting, but he writes over that the head of Yishmael is actually Kavur in Mitzrayim. It's buried in Egypt. So we know it to be interesting because you contrast that to Esav. We know Esav's head is buried in Marat HaMachpelah in Hebron in Israel, but now according to this, the Ketzei and Sefer Ketzei Yamin, Yishmael's head is buried in Egypt. So I'm not sure what the deeper ideas behind that is, but there's probably much to talk about with Ishmael's head. So this got me thinking, because, what is Yosef doing fighting Ishmael? Like, what do we know about Yosef? We know Yosef is compared to the shore. Yosef is the ox, just like Esav is the ox. And Yosef is known as the Sitno de Esav. We spoke about in so many recordings that Yosef is the arch enemy of Esav. He's the one that fights against that. And we know the famous Chazal, we talk about it all by Purim time, that the Bnei Yosef and really all of the Bnei Rachel, they are the ones who are tasked to take down Esav, to take down ultimately Amalek, whether it's going to be Yosef himself, whether it's going to be Yoshua from Ephraim, again, one of the skies of Yosef, whether it's going to be the other kids of Rachel from Binyamin, whether it's Shaul fighting Amalek, whether it's Mordechai in the Purim story, but it's the Bnei Rachel that are supposed to fight Esav. So what in the world is Yosef doing fighting Ishmael right now? What's he doing in Mitzrayim? Why does the Ramchal say that he's needed over here? What is the koch of Yosef when it corresponds to Ishmael? Now, also, it was bothering me a little bit, because we know that who is Yosef? Yosef is the Sitna de Esav. His main person he has to fight against is Esav. But didn't we say that originally, we had the two sisters, Leah and Rachel? So Leah is the one who's supposed to correspond to Esav. So shouldn't it be the Bnei Leah that take down Esav? So what is it? So maybe you need the opposite energy. Maybe you need the Bnei Rachel take down Esav, and then the Bnei Leah would take down the Ishmael. But then we see over here that we have Yosef showing up to fight against Ishmael. So what's going on with Yosef? What is he, an Esav guy or not? So in the past, we had actually mentioned that Yosef symbolizes both energies of Rachel and Leah, because the change took place under the chuppah. That when Rachel gave the simanim to Leah, there was this little bit of a switcheroo happening. Or he said maybe a couple other opinions that maybe when Rachel and Leah they made the exchange of root for Reuven's dudaim, hadudaim natnu reach. Maybe at that point there was an exchange. Or maybe kabbalistically when Dinah and Yosef switched stomachs. But it appears that Yosef also has this power against Ishmael, or at least at the very least to start the battle against Ishmael, because we know Mashiach ben Yosef will always set the path for Mashiach ben David. And it seems to be even in the Galut Ishmael, the same thing is going to happen. If we go back to our Hamor symbolism, so we mentioned when it comes to the Hamor, when it comes to the donkeys, we said that when it comes to Egypt is known as the Basar Chamorim. They have the flesh of the donkeys. We said it relates to the male member, to the Ta'ava for his nut, but it's interesting, in the other three groups that are corresponding to a Hamor, we have Yishmael, like we mentioned, and he was the Amadome Hamor. And then we have also Shechem ben Hamor. We have the whole story of Shechem and the rape of Dinah, another story of terrible znut. He's the son of Hamor. So we have ourselves Hamor in all three of these stories. And in all three of these stories, we also have the Brit Milah. We know Ishmael has his Brit Milah at 13 years old. Now we have Yosef giving the Brit Milah to Mitzrayim. And the Shechem ben Hamor, that's the whole story of Shimon and Levi, telling them all to do a Brit Milah. Now ultimately though, Yosef won't be enough to defeat Mitzrayim. We're going to have to wait a couple generations until Moshe Rabbeinu comes out there and the Koach of Moshe and all of Am Yisrael. That's going to be the Koach to defeat the Hamor of Yishmael. And ultimately, we can't leave the Shor and Hamor together. That's why Moshe is going to go out of his way to take out the Atzmot Yosef, where you got to take out the bones of Yosef. Yosef, the Shor, cannot remain in the land of the Hamor. We can't mix those two together. Actually, I was thinking, we speak about the Atzmot Yosef. We have the bones of Yosef as opposed to the meat, the basar of the Hamor. I wonder if there's this deeper contrast. We have the Yosef and the Brit Milah and the Atzamot as opposed to the Znut and the Basar Hamorim of Mitzrayim. We can see an even deeper contrast. But the Hamor symbolism doesn't just end there, because we know when Bnei Yisrael are finally leaving Egypt, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a couple of new mitzvot. We're going to do the Brit Milah again, we're going to do the Korban Pesach, and we get the mitzvah of the Peter Hamor. We have to redeem the Hamor with a lamb. But if you don't redeem the Hamor, and Hamor again here is symbolizing Egypt, then what do you have to do? You have to break the back of the donkey's neck. You have to break the Hamor's oref. Oref is the back of the neck. Oref are the same letters as Paro. So you have like this destruction, the end result of Mitzrayim as Bnei Israel are leaving Egypt. Okay, so as we've been saying, Yosef, especially after the Eshet Potiphar story, he seems to be the strongest one to fight against the Znut. And based on our Pasuk, based on the Kabbalistic literature, he epitomizes the Brit Milah, the Tikkun HaBrit. He's the Yasod. He's not messing up with the Znut. Now, where do we know? Where did his like super Znut? Where does it come from? So we mentioned in the past that his mother Rachel was known for its Znut. She was known to be the Shatkanit. She knew when to be quiet, how to be quiet, as opposed to the Avodah of Leah. Leah, we mentioned, was corresponding to Esav, who was the Ish Sadeh. So Leah was known as the Yatzanit. She's the one that used to go out. Rachel hides much more. Yosef tries his hardest. He's trying to meet Apek, hold back his identity. The Rachel's great-great-great-granddaughter, Esther Malka, is also going to hide her identity. Shaul HaMelech at times also hides when he first becomes king. There's a certain level of tzniut that we find by Rachel, and that could be maybe the koach of this tzniut might be what Yosef is inheriting, and this tzniut is what can fight against the znut of Mitzrayim. We also mentioned, back to Sarai Meno and Goshen, we already said her zachut of Goshen. Also, it's from this tzniut to be able to create this suburb in Egypt that's protected from the negative environment from the country. So we see this zachut might already come from the imahot, from Rachel Imenu and Sarai Imenu. But on the other hand, we can counter a little bit, because Yosef was also known to be outward as well. He becomes second in command in Egypt, and at least on the surface, he wants to change the non-Jewish world, and he wants to give them this Brit Milah, and he's trying to affect the non-Jewish world just as much as the Jewish world. Actually, a certain argument can be made that Yehuda, when he wants to set up Goshen, is much more insular looking than Yosef. Yosef does have this Leah character trait of being a Yatzanit. So this too might be part of the Rachel Leah switch that we spoke about. We also mentioned in previous years that Leah was known for her soft eyes. Why did she have the Einayim Rakot? Because she was crying and crying and crying. Crying because she had to marry Esav, or as the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, crying because she needs that extra koch to fight the Yetzer Hara. Because if she's the person who goes out there into the world, the Yetzer Hara is so much stronger out there. You have to cry in your tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now what's interesting, we see that Leah cries and cries in the beginning. But after the switch with Rachel Imenu, we no longer hear about Leah's soft eyes. And what do we hear about? We're going to hear in the future about Rachel mevaka al banea. Rachel is going to be the one that's going to cry for the Jewish people. When we're going to go off into exile, Rachel is going to be outside the city of Beit Lechem. She's not buried in Mount Machpelah. She's not with the rest of Avot, with Yaakov Avinu in Hebron. Rather, she's outside alone on the side of the road, and she's the one that's crying. Yosef in our parshiyot is the one that's always crying. And interestingly enough, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers Rachel Imenu's prayers in the future, he's going to say, stop your tears. Amar Adonai, min kolech mi bechi. Stop crying. Ve'enach min dim'ah. Stop the tears. Why? Ki yesh sachar. Because you have reward. Kol lefiulatech ne'um Adonai v'shavu me'eretz oyev. And the Jewish people are going to come back. We're going to shavu ligvulam. We're going to come back from the land Eretz Oivrav, from the land of our enemies. We mentioned Rabbeinu Bachaya in the past. Rabbeinu Bachaya teaches us Oyev in the Torah refers to Yishmael, Soneh refers to Esav. So here we have the tears of Rachel Imenu. That's going to be the tears that's going to defeat us, going to bring us back from the Oyev, from the Yishmael. We mentioned in last week's Dvar Torah that Yishmael's koach comes from the water. Well, now we have our own water. We have our tears. We have Rachel's tears, Rachel Imenu, Rachel Mavaka al Banea. We have Yosef's tears in our parashiyot. That might be the koach that we need. It's their tears that we need to begin this battle against Esav. Now, if we go back to where we started with the Kli Yakar, so the Kli Yakar spoke about the famine being called a herpa, a disgrace, an embarrassment. He also spoke about being uncircumcised. We saw from the Pesukim of the Dina story that for someone to be uncircumcised, to not have a Brit Milah, it's also called a herpa. Now, Le'anut Da'ati, in my humble opinion, I'm thinking there might be one more connection with the language of herpa and this story of Yosef facing Ishmael in Egypt. Okay, so when Yosef is finally born, the Torah tells us what happens. Vatahar vateled, Rachel Imenu conceived and she gave birth. Vateled ben, she had a son. Vatomer, and says Rachel Imenu, Asaf Elohim et herpati. Hashem has taken away my disgrace, my embarrassment, my herpa. I no longer have a herpa because now Asaf Elohim, I have a boy, I have a son. Now we know, we're going to see in a second. Next pasuk says, Vatikra Shemo Yosef. She names himself Yosef. Lemo Yosef Adonai ben Aher. May God give me Yosef another kid. Add for me another kid. So Yosef is a prayer for the future. May I have more kids. But you can't forget the pasuk right before that says, Asaf Elohim et herpati, that Hashem has taken away my disgrace. Asaf, also a language of Yosef, because now with Yosef's birth, her disgrace, her herpa, has been taken away. So Rashi now comes along and says, what was her disgrace? What is this herpa? What is herpati, the embarrassment? Says Rashi, Shayiti lecherpa shani akara. That Rachel was embarrassed. She had shame because she was akara, because she was barren, she was childless. So cherpa is also a hint to not having children. So I was thinking, let's take this back to the first barren mother, the first of the imahot who couldn't have a child, Sarah Imenu. And Sarah Imenu comes to Avram Avinu with a plan. I have to fix my childness. How do I have a child? I'm also barren. What do I do? I'm akara. So she says, I have to give rid of my cherpa. How do I give rid of my cherpa? So she says to Abraham, have a child with Hagar. He's going to be the surrogate child, and then we'll have this Yishmael, and we'll raise Yishmael, and we're going to build a nation that way. So Yishmael was supposed to metaken the cherpa of Sarai Imenu. But instead, the exact opposite happened. Yishmael became that next cherpa challenge. And that's going to demand a Yosef. A Yosef also, after all the years of Rachel Imenu not having a child, finally Yosef comes and he's going to be ma'asef the cherpa. He's going to be the koach to fight against the cherpa and fight against the first mistaken tikkun of the cherpa, the first Yishmael who never actually fixed that hole that Sarai Imenu had. Bezrat Hashem, I want to close with one last deep idea. We've been speaking the last couple of weeks about the Avot fighting the battle against the Nephilim, the fallen angels, those evil angels that made all the balagan by the generation of the flood, with all the znut that they did back there, and all the terrible, terrible destruction, the Hamas that they did at the end of Bereshit, beginning of Parshat Noach, and how they manifest themselves in future generations, particularly in Ishmael. We found them as well by the city of Sodom. So we have the Nephilim in different places along the way with the Avot fighting against them. Now in our parasha, it's time for Yosef to take up the challenge against the Nephilim. Here's what I saw, unbelievable idea in the Be'er Basadeh. It's a commentator on Rashi quoting the Yakut Reuveni al Pi Kabbalah. The Be'er Basadeh writes, "V'atam sheratza Yosef she'imolu." Why did Yosef? What's the reason why Yosef wanted to circumcise the Mitzrim? He says, "Nirali, it appears to me, mishum shelo mal ela mikzatam." It's because he only circumcised some of them. He did not circumcise all the Mitzrim. He actually had very specific ones that he wanted to circumcise. And who are they? Vehem ha'erev rav. This is the Eruv Rav. We're going to speak about the Eruv Rav. I guess now these circumcised, they're going to be able to leave with us when we leave Egypt. But there's the mixed multitude, the Eruv Rav that is in Mitzrayim. Who are they? Vehem hayu nitzotzot shel keri madam harishon. These are the nitzotzot of the Keri Adam Rishon. Okay, Kabbalistic ideas about Adam Rishon. Speak to your breast lovers. I'll speak to you about how the Brit Milah, the Tikkun Yasod, fixes those things. Tikkun Klali, stuff beyond the scope of this recording. But what happened to these people? These sparks from a mess up of Adam Rishon. Shebau bedor Mabul, who arrived in the Dor HaMabul. Veishchitu adarkam ala aretz, and they made the destruction. They were mashchit everything. These are the Nephilim. These are the Nephilim. V'hashtan itgalgelu b'Mitzrayim, and now their souls came back in a gilgul in Mitzrayim. So who are the ones that Yosef? Umalotam Yosef kadei letakenam, and this is why Yosef right now is trying to fix them, as it says in Yakut Reuveni, quoting the Arizal. we're fighting against the Nephilim, and Yosef right now is doing a tikkun against these Nephilim in Mitzrayim. B'ezrat Hashem, we should be zocheh to take all of these evil Nephilim and find the ways to make the tikkun, whether it's with the strength of Yosef, or whether, as we saw in the past with Yaakov, or whether, as we saw in the past with Avraham Avinu, but whatever it is, get it done, so these fallen angels will be defeated. Shabbat Shalom.